Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this preservation school class, Challenges in Cellar and Basement Use in New York City. We have had several other preservation schools happening this fall, and we do them twice a semester every year. So you can find all of those on our website, hdc.org. All the videos are there. You can also find them on our YouTube channel. In addition to all of our other video content there, we have walking tours. All of our virtual content since 2020 has been recorded. It's available there. You can find all of that. If you would like additional information, you can email me, Michelle Arbulu, marbulu@hdc.org. We have another preservation school tomorrow night, if you have not signed up already, planning in New York City. It will be at 5 p.m. And we will have an additional one later on in the next few months. And then we will do our spring semester. And again, you can find all the information on our website, hdc.org. And with that, I will hand it over to Laura.
Hi, thank you, Historic Districts Council, for inviting me to give this presentation, Challenges in Cellar and Basement Use in New York City. As many of you may know, I'm an architect practicing in Queens. I've had my office in Sunnyside since 2006. There's my storefront office right there. I've done a lot of properties in Sunnyside in the historic district, as indicated with the red dots. And my husband and I just published a book about Sunnyside Gardens, which we're very proud of. I did the illustrations, Jeffrey was the author, and that's our house on the front. And I say this in part just to give you sort of the background to why I'm here. I've done a lot of work in Queens, and a lot of the work has involved cellars. Because that's typical. It's very typical. All the houses here in Sunnyside have cellars, and I've done a lot of work in them and around them, and I've learned more about cellars and the rules and the requirements from the Department of Building side than I care to admit. And in addition, during IDA, my cellar here in the office, which is shown on the left, was actually flooded, seriously, sewage backup. And it gave me pause to think about what I really thought about people living in cellars, since our neighborhood was so badly impacted in this whole area of Queens. And I wrote a piece in the Daily News called "This is No Way to Live. Most illegal basement apartments cannot be brought up to code." This was just an illustration here on the right of what happened during IDA here in our neighborhood. So it's very personal, it's very close to home. My office was impacted dramatically, as were many of my clients who live in this neighborhood, who came by as they watched me try to dry up my cellar. And so I put this out there, and HDC contacted me and said, maybe you should do this program, which I thought was a great idea. It was more challenging to try to be user-friendly and simple than I thought, but it's a good exercise always. I also was invited to participate in the Civic leadership program at the AIA New York. They did a program on the legalization of basement units, very pro the program of legalizing basement units. So I got to be the controversial one, sort of giving more of a practitioner's view of what it's like to try to actually work on those spaces. But it was really great to be part of that discussion because it's a very big citywide issue. And it's always good to be part of other forums where it's being discussed. In addition, I've been working since 2017 with the not-for-profit Restored Homes. Restored Homes purchases from NYCHA for $1, abandoned properties throughout Queens and Brooklyn. I'm focused in Queens, and we restore them. It's very gratifying work, but the houses are basically gutted. There's basically nothing left except the exterior frame. All the siding is changed. And I've also been exposed to a lot of different cellar conditions in the course of this work. These are the first 4 houses that we did. You can see that that's the historic photo. This is how I come on board with them. And then we restore them. They're sold back to through a lottery selection system as affordable housing in the end. But all of these houses have cellars that I've worked on, actually. So I'm also very familiar with the cellar conditions given this extent in Jamaica in particular. And most recent set that's starting in construction now includes Far Rockaway and Jamaica, and it includes 2 families. So this is sort of just giving you the background of why I'm interested in this topic and how I came to be somewhat of an expert in things that you could do in your cellars, basements. So these photos are from houses that we restored with restored homes. So a typical cellar, the typical cellar has low ceilings. This one actually isn't that low, but they typically have low ceilings. They have small, high windows, steep stairs, never to code, and an open boiler and hot water heater. All of these things are not safe. They're not pleasant to live with. They don't meet code requirements for light and air, and they could be a fire hazard. And people live in them, actually, of course. So this is just giving you sort of the setting of where these cellar apartments, what they look like in a before. And as you know, I'm not going to give you a history lesson. The city of New York worked hard over the years to provide every tenant in this city with light and air, adequate for a quality of life, starting with the historical evolution of zoning, with Jacob Riis photographing conditions in the slums, to the Tenant House Act of 1901, the zoning resolution. And you can see the difference. Basically, Sunnyside Gardens at the bottom is the extreme, but basically you're trying to provide 30 feet of distance from a window so that you can get adequate light and air. And that's not easy to do when the price of land is very high, right? There's a big trade-off going on. Is it the window or is it the land? So and I don't know the whole history of this program because I wasn't part of the program. I was asked to attend several of the meetings in the beginning because Restored Homes was involved. And I attended some of the meetings and it piqued my interest. To me, it's like a puzzle. It's a puzzle. How can you take a cellar and make it work? How can you make it code compliant with all of the requirements that the city overlays onto residential properties here in New York? The program was a joint effort of the City of New York, HPD, and the Cypress Hills Local Development, and it was based in East Brooklyn. The goal was to have a pilot to renovate and legalize basement or cellar apartments. So I'm going to have to start with a basic description of the difference between a basement and a cellar. A basement is a building story that is at least 1/2 above grade. So here you have just a hypothetical room, an 8x8 cube. And if it's a cellar, it goes down. And if it's a basement, it goes up. So basically a basement is coming up out of the ground, more light and air, obviously. And a cellar is going down into the ground. So anything that's more than 1/2 below grade is a cellar. It's a key difference in zoning and the building code in New York City. Because when you go below grade, you don't have as much access to light and air, period. You have harder time getting out. You need more stairs. It's just a fact that it becomes more life safety issue as you go down than when you come up. So currently in New York City, cellar apartments are not legally allowed, period. Cellar apartments are not allowed. So I have clients approach me all the time with their properties, and almost always, in fact, always, they are more than 1/2 below grade. They're cellars. They were designed to be for storage and mechanical space. They don't count in the floor area. So you may already be at your max. You get this bonus area down there that's your cellar. And the light and ventilation egress can be challenging, if not impossible. Basement apartments are legally allowed in New York City. They have to meet the code and zoning. The basement area counts in the floor area of the house. And they can provide habitable space with adequate light, ventilation, and egress. And here you can see this section sketch, which is basically a basement. It's more than 1/2 above grade. You can easily get a window in there to provide the 30 foot of light and air that you need for the required habitable space. It's not that hard to get out. It's a couple steps. You're not that far down below grade. And most basement apartments are basement apartments. I mean, they're used. You would never add that 8 feet of old code ceiling height if you weren't going to use it for space. That's because it's included in your floor area. And this is just showing how some below grade access happens. I realized doing this presentation that these actually aren't legal apartments because the window is not 6 inches above the exterior, but Anyway, this shows you how much of the front yard gets taken up with the ability to get into the unit. So a lot of people don't realize, I mean, I do because I do this all the time, that it's really hard for homeowners, single family homeowners, to use their cellars just as their own recreational space. A 1 and 2 family house requires a declaration for a cellar bathroom. So in order to have a shower and a sink and a toilet, you need to comply with all of these regulations. This is for a homeowner. And you have to stipulate on your deed that you will not sleep, live, cook in the cellar, and it won't be rented for independent dwelling. So that's the one side of the pendulum for how the city of New York looks at cellar apartments. The cellars for homeowners, we are not allowed to use them. We are not allowed to sleep in them, and we are not allowed to rent them. And this is just a typical Sunnyside. Actually, it's an extra wide Sunnyside house, but this is a typical layout of what is legally possible in a cellar with the deed restriction, an accessory use, an enclosed mechanical room, laundry, a bathroom with 3 pieces, and other storage area less than 60 feet that doesn't have a window. They don't want a bedroom down there. So the next thing to try to make this like building blocks to understand it is the different types of houses you typically encounter, 1 and 2 family houses. I've used Queens as my example because that's what I'm most familiar with. So I looked at the houses that I've worked on, basically. I thought this would be a great exercise to try to explain the issues with cellars, was just to look at the ones I've done. So there's an attached house. Basically, it's a row house. There's a semi-detached, which is only attached on one side, like a duplex. There's a 0 lot line where the house actually sits on the lot line, but there's a driveway and a driveway for the neighbor. And then there's a detached, which usually doesn't give you a lot of property around it, but it just means it's not touching the property lines. So those are the types of houses you typically encounter. And this matters in terms of egress and light and air, which I'll show you. So here's the kit of parts, the basic building blocks. First, you have to, when you're approaching a cellar or basement apartment, basically for most of the rest of this talk, I'm going to talk primarily about cellars because basement apartments are straightforward. You can have a basement apartment right now. It's just a matter of, it's not even that hard, in my opinion, to meet code to make it a basement apartment, and it's legal. So the more controversial issue is the cellar apartments. And as I've told you, every house that I've worked on has a cellar. So that's clearly a large number of the houses that could be converted from a 1 family to a 2 family with my data points. So the ceiling height, if you use the old code, which most of these houses were built before 68. So of course, there's all these different codes. That's a complicated issue, but you're usually encouraged to use the code that's closest to the time it's built. There's benefits, like you can have a 30-foot wide stair instead of 36, which helps you when you're in a tight space. So in the old code, you need an 8-foot high minimum ceiling and a habitable space, which is a living room, bedroom, spaces you actually live in, 7.6 in a hallway, and 7 in a bathroom. And most of the cellars don't meet the first requirement of 8 feet. And excavation is very expensive. People do excavate, people do go down, but people go down just because they want to use their cellars, not to rent, just because they want to use them and the ceiling heights aren't high enough. But that's also something to consider. So the ceiling height is the first thing when you are looking at the cellar to see if you can use it. That's one of the first things you have to look at. Then you have to think about the sources of light and air. The sources of light will congregate to the street side and the rear yard because there's a 30-foot clear rear yard requirement, and that gives you the distance you need for the light and air. And the window needs to be, can only be 6 inches below the grade in order to count. The window has to be, 6 inches above the grade. So there's all these, you'll see in a diagram I did, it's very complicated. And sometimes a side yard can be 15 feet and count. But none of the houses I've done have 15 feet in the side. They're all driveways. They're like 8 feet. So typically the front and rear are where you go for the light and air. Next, the window requirements. There's basic window requirements. Light is 10% of the floor area. Ventilation is 5%. But the minimum size of a window that can be used to provide this is 12 square feet. So we've got this 12 square foot window, which is a pretty big window. And you're trying to put it in a cellar where you're going to have to go down to get the window in just from the start. And then also in the program, they require that the windows in the bedrooms have emergency egress. So that makes the windows slightly bigger because you have to have 30 inches high and 24 inches wide. So it's doable. I mean, I'll show you, but these are just the constraints that you have to play with in your kit of parts to try to make the cellar habitable, safe, and fulfilling in terms of light and air. And so clearly, it's definitely clear that the farther you go below grade, the harder it is to meet these requirements. And a glider window is usually what works. And basically, if you try to do a double hung, it doesn't work really. So egress, you only need one means of egress from a basement. And the egress must lead directly to a public way, not just to a yard. So it has to go to the street. So now you're realizing, if you sort of start to think this through, there's a lot of stuff happening on the front of the house to make this happen. There's the egress, there's light and air, if you're going to get rooms down there. And most of the houses that I showed you are not that wide. They're 16 to 24 feet wide. So it's a lot of real estate needs to be right there along that linear front and rear. So I thought if I just took the plans of these typical houses that I've worked on and said, okay, this is the row house, the attached. So this is where you can get the light and air. This is my house actually in Sunnyside. So you can see that. So of course the bedrooms cluster to the light. The bathroom doesn't have to be on the light, but that's this layout. The bedrooms definitely cluster to the light. They're habitable space. They need to have the windows. And living rooms also. This is a semi-detached, it's a one-floor apartment, duplex, 2 stories. So this one has the living room and the bedrooms facing the light and air. And this one also. So you can see that zone of light and air is really key to how you can lay out the plan of the houses. So then we looked at the cellars of these houses just to try to see, okay, so we've got these houses, can these work? Could these work with the rules that have been set up? So the city council in this local law set up rules that aren't the standard rules in New York City currently. They made some exceptions to try to see if the pilot program could work. So in that exception, they said that a cellar could be an apartment if it had 2 means of egress to the right of way. So 2 means of egress for a row house is almost impossible because you can't get to the right of way. So the first house is out, right? You can only come to the front to get to the street. It has a cellar. You can see here's the cellar. It's totally below. It's a little bit above grade in the back. The site slopes, but it's below grade. So this house is out right now. The cellar in my house can't meet the program needs, period, because of this. Next, there was one of the zero lot line house. You can see here's the cellar. It's definitely more than it's close, but it's more than half below grade. And this one we're going to look at in more detail later. This house, I realized, actually doesn't have a cellar, doesn't even have a basement. It's on grade. It's 2 apartments with a garage in the front. It's also very typical. But this one is located in a flood zone. So we actually had to remove the ground apartment that's in the back because it's in a flood zone. So it was kind of the opposite condition of things having to be removed because of their site. So an apartment's lost here. And then the last one is the detached house, and it has a cellar, as you can see. You can see it's very typical of these cellars. And we're going to look at that one in a little more detail also. So in the cellar, you typically find the mechanical room, which is usually the boiler and the hot water heater. Often there's illegal bathrooms, because that's just the way it is. And there's the mechanical, the gas meter, the electric meters, all of that stuff is already down there in the cellar. The other thing I realized is a lot of the houses in Queens have porches in the front. This house has a porch in the front. It has no space under that porch. So, it's interesting. And some of them have this little porch in the front, which also is going to be blocking the amount of linear feet in the front that you can use for egress and light and air. So in the rules that they proposed for this new local law in the specific district in Brooklyn, they sort of, as I said, they sort of tweaked what is existing. They said, basically, now the code is always up for interpretation, and there's always other ways to see it, but in my reading, they're now saying you could have a 7-foot minimum high ceiling. Current code is actually 7.6, and in some places in the country, 7 foot is the minimum ceiling. So I don't really have a huge problem with that. It's just not what everyone else has to do. So I get the 7-foot ceiling. All the apartments must have an automatic sprinkler. The automatic sprinkler is incredibly costly. It means you have to bring in from the street a whole sprinkler system for the cellar. This is for cellar or basement apartments. So that cost is kind of becomes a huge threshold for someone trying to complete a cellar conversion to a legal apartment. The emergency escape and rescue openings in all sleeping rooms, which you need. We saw that in the flood. You need, if you're trapped in your bedroom, to be able to get out the window to get out when the door is jimmied shut by a flood of water. So I totally get that you need this escape route, but then you have to remember it's going to cause you to go down more in order to get the size that's required for a body to get through a window, which is slightly different than the size required to get light and air in for life. The boiler room has to be separated. That's just a cost issue. You have to do fire separations for everything. And it has to be accessed without going through the apartment. So then we're getting another space issue because you have to get to that boiler without going through the apartment, which makes sense, actually. But it's hard to do. Egress, you need to be able to exit with a landing on each side. And as I said, basements is one egress to a right of way, and cellars need 2, which is very challenging. They have to be remotely located. So there'd be one in the front, one in the back, basically. Windows, this is okay. This is standard, 12 square feet per code. So what they did in order to help you make the windows work as you go down, because currently it just doesn't work. When you start to go down, you can't meet the light and air. You're going to be more than 6 inches above the grade. You're going to be below the grade, and that just doesn't work in the current code. So they provided a formula to have light wells. And the light well is 3 times the width perpendicular as the window is below grade, and 2 times parallel. So you're getting this light well carved out of the ground as you go down so that the window that has to be a certain size can be put in the rooms that are habitable so that you can have enough light and air. The cellar, they did make then that's hard to do. That's hard to do. And the cellar has to have at least 2 feet above grade. So you can't do an apartment totally below grade, actually. And now the floor area in the cellar and the basements are going to, they always already probably did, but now they're going to count in the floor area. So you're going to have to check that you can really have 2 units. You have to check, it's called the dwelling unit factor, to make sure that the area is enough to be a 2-family. And you're going to have to check to see if there's enough floor area left over by zoning to even add space to your house. And then you have to meet current energy code requirements, and you have to resolve your violations, which is costly. I don't think I've ever been to a property that didn't have potential violations. Not that they have them, but people do a lot of stuff in their houses before they buy the houses. It's there. And the energy code is very stringent now. So to try to bring up a old wood frame or even a masonry cellar up to code with the new current energy code is challenging. So how do you do it? How do you actually make this work? Here we've got the cellar, and the cellar's moving down. And this is basically a section that, from my understanding of everything, works. So I just did a room. This is 8 by 8. It should be a house, but I just use that as the building block. You can have a 7-foot high minimum ceiling. You can't go more than 2 feet. You have to have 2 feet above the grade in order for the room to still be able to be a legal apartment. So we're going down 5 feet. That gives you about a 5 by 6 by 2 foot deep light well. And then you can get a glider window that allows you to get out and also gives you the right amount of light and air. So this is once I tried to do this, there weren't really a lot of other options. This is sort of the worst case scenario. But you have to imagine I'm looking at it as what you can do, and really you're coming into an existing cellar and trying to make it work. So there's many more obstacles, but in an ideal world, this is a way to do it. The window that provides the light can't come down lower than 30 inches to count for the light and air. And it's supposed to be within 36 in order to get out. So there's rules about how high this window can be also, so that you can get out of the window, and so that you're not having a window that's like on the floor trying to provide you light and air. So this is a simple diagram of the back, where you can see the glider window and the light well that has to be carved out in order to provide that in to make the room habitable. So then I went back and looked at the two cellars that seem to remain in the pool as a sort of a tool to try to see how to explain this. And the first one is only 16 foot wide. It's a zero lot line house, and it has a porch in the front that's not down at the same level as grade. It has like 3 feet under it. So you can't use any of that space unless you carved out the entire footprint here to get it down so that you can get light and air and egress this way. So, and a lot of houses in Queens have these porches. So that's sort of a hurdle. You could dig down under the porch, I assume, and try to reach the space out, but that's just something that surprised me when I did this. I didn't realize that would be a problem, and it is. And then of course in the back, here's the existing boiler room. I tried to throw in a bathroom and a bedroom, and this is the egress that has to be able to get to the boiler room. And there's no second egress because you can't get out this way. I guess you could try to put one here. So, and you can't get 2 rooms across this because it's 16 feet. So I concluded that this one, and you can't get any windows in the front, could be a studio, except you can't get around to the front. So I just thought if I talked through some examples of what you encounter in the cellars, that it might be helpful to understand the rules rather than just reading off the rules and requirements. So that's the first one. The second one was a little bit more user-friendly. It's wider, it's 24, and it has a porch, but it has 2 sides to the porch. So it seemed that you could get egress to the front and to the back. And you could, of course, you have to allow for the stair. This is the stair to go up to the first floor for the house above. And you could, in this scheme, have a bathroom, a boiler room, a kitchen. Kitchen can be inboard. It has to meet certain requirements, but it doesn't have to have the window. The bathroom doesn't have to have the window either. And you could have a bedroom. And this is the living space. These are the light wells that would need to be carved out so that it could meet the light and air requirements. So I took this one and then I just collapsed it in to try to make like a prototype of what it could be so that it would be clear in terms of an explanation tool, because this is a typical house in Queens. It's 20 by 30. I mean, they vary, but I mean, just to get a conversation going, it's common that they're in this range. You don't gain a lot by getting more in the center because you don't have the light and air. So you usually put these types of spaces, kitchens and bathrooms, in that location. You try to get all the living and bedrooms on the ends. And it could be 40 feet deep, 30 feet deep, but still you're gonna get the living room, a bedroom. You're gonna carve out in the front for the light and air. You're gonna carve out in the back for the light and air. You're gonna have the way to get up to the first floor of the house above and the way to get out the back. And you're gonna be able to have 2 means with an alleyway to get up to the street. And here we did the 3D model to try to show you the amount of carving that it takes to make this work. And of course, every time you go down, there's like a ratio with the most steepest stair allowed in the old code of 1.09. So basically it's 5 feet down here. It's a little bit more than 5 feet of linear stair. So you have to figure out where to put that linear stair in the front and the back in order to provide the 2 means of egress that are going to allow you to safely use this unit. So then we sort of, we were doing this in the office, and then we sort of thought, like, what is it going to look like? Like all these stairs and light wells. I mean, if this is the new, visually what could happen to the streetscape, It could be very changing of how we perceive our streetscapes. So we did this to sort of give an idea of how much of the, if you have a 10-foot front yard, which a lot of people do, then a lot of the zoning is 10 feet, it's basically all taken up with stairs and light wells now in order to comply with the ability to get the light and air and the egress out of the cellar in the front. And then we have to go back to the water issues. This is my cellar. I had intensive sewage backup during Sandy. It was, during Ida, sorry, it was very unpleasant. But that's not the only issue. There are 4 issues in cellars, and anyone who has a cellar has these issues at some time or another. There are things you can do about them, but they all cost money and they don't all solve everything. First, there's seepage. You know, the houses are old. The water comes through the concrete walls, up through the slab. That happens. Pipe in our houses, often the water, and in my office the same thing, the water comes from the roof down through a pipe in the building, under the building, out to the sewer system. That's common. My house does that also. So if there's a crack in that pipe, it's also going to cause issues in your cellar. Then of course there's sewage backup. Sewage backup is not usually this extreme, but it comes in many forms. You can have a backflow preventer. If you have a backflow preventer, you have to realize that none of your internal uses can be used when a bad situation is happening, because otherwise it'll flood all the other spaces in your building. So for example, here, I'm not really eager to get one because it would flood my office and my apartments upstairs, because the water would back up the pipe that comes from the roof down out to the sewer. And then of course there's flood, there's water. We didn't have this here, but several of my clients had it, where the water at the level outside of the door was so high that it came into the building. That's different than sewage backup and seepage and pipe crack. That's water actually coming in from the exterior. That's also very challenging in cellars, and you need to be able to get out when those situations are happening. So I try to sort of think about the cost benefits of doing this, and I'll leave time for a discussion here. There's no question, I think one of the biggest issues is that the City of New York zoning code isn't really designed for 1- and 2-family houses. It's incredibly challenging. I will tell you, as a practicing architect who in general files her own projects, to go through the process with the building code and with the building department for small residential jobs. It's cumbersome. I hear reactions from people saying, you know, why can't a homeowner do this with this program? I'm like, a homeowner can't do it even outside of this program. And it's too bad. It's just too bad, because the opacity of the rules makes it hard to understand. And it would be great, I think it'd be great if this program actually brought attention to the challenge in the outer boroughs of trying to use a massive building code on very small scale projects. That's my first point. Next, in terms of cost of doing your cellar, there's a minimum $150,000 per 600 square foot unit. That's just my number. And if you're going to add sprinklers, it's another $25,000. You have to bring it in from the street. You probably don't have enough of a connection, so it's all new. You're going to increase the density in a low scale neighborhood. Some people think that's positive. Some people don't think that's positive. I didn't move to Sunnyside to have the density increased. And we live in a mixed neighborhood with two, 3, and 1 family houses. So I do think it's good to have the mix, but the increased density will cause impacts to parking, which I didn't even address, because I think they're gonna give a pass on the parking requirements. There's impact on parking and also the currently overburdened transit. And the front yards are going to be cluttered with light wells and egress stairways, as we tried to illustrate in the 3D rendering of what would happen if all of these front yards were made for egress and light and air. The benefits, clearly, it would be better to have safer basement and cellar units, especially the ones that are already being used. The basement units should be safe, to be honest, because they are if they are really a basement apartment, they're already legal. So clearly landlords have to do the right thing. That's a whole other challenge, but they certainly can be. It would provide more legal housing in New York City, which is the driving force behind trying to use the cellar apartments. But is it really affordable in the long term? Is it really affordable? Is the amount of money we're putting in to create a subpar space worth it? It's a lot of money, and it's not really a great space in the end. So it seems to me really the unfortunate, I'm sure everyone is aware of this, that land values are so high now that it's very hard to do affordable housing. And this is a way to not increase. You don't add land, you just dig out your house and add more units. So I get the financial, that aspect of providing more housing, but I'm not really sure it's affordable in the long run. As a landlord doing this, it would cost a lot of money. I know the city is hoping to help, but I can't imagine the city can help every homeowner who wants to have a cellar apartment do the work. And the amount of work, I think even in the program, they were surprised at the costs that are involved to do this. And then is the resulting quality really what we've envisioned and worked towards all these years since the turn of the century? To me, it's sort of going backwards in the sense of light and air, just in terms of light and air. We've freed the population that would be inhabiting units below grade to not have to deal with the light and air. And I guess it's one thing to have people living there, another to make it legal and say it's the right thing, and to say that this is what we think affordable housing should be. Finally, it turned out it's really hard to find sellers that meet the criteria. I know because I still am in contact. I'm still working with Restored Homes. I wasn't selected to work on the program, but I do hear about the program. And it was hard. It was hard. It's not just the funding. It was hard to find the perfect constellation of characteristics for the house, ability to get to the street, an owner that was willing to put up the part of the money that they had to do. It was a very complicated process. And I think it's because cellars were designed to be storage spaces. I mean, that's what they were designed to be. So it's very hard to shoehorn them into this new use. And as I tried to demonstrate with the diagrams, the linear footage of the front and rear totally limits the egress and light and air. So it's kind of a puzzle that needs to be, that there really is no out to. There's a limited, if you're looking at a specific house, you've got the box, there's a box. And it's just, that was what was really intriguing to me, was to try to solve the puzzle. And I'm really glad HDC had me do this talk, because that's how I approached it, was that I was going to try to see if I could solve the puzzle. And it's actually very hard. It's very hard. And it's in part because there's not enough linear footage to actually make it work for a lot of the houses. And then, as I mentioned, often there are porches in the front with crawl spaces that block the front. So again, I think it's great. I think it's great that the city has been trying to find new ways to do affordable housing, and it's a unique tact. But I try to actually see the feasibility of it. And so I put this together to try to show how challenging it is to actually implement this well-intentioned idea. Thank you. Michelle, do you want to have questions?
Yes, thank you very much. That was, again, as you were saying, it's a lot. But yes, if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat, or if you'd like, you can unmute or turn your camera on.
Do you want us to raise our hand?
Go ahead, Christine.
Okay, so thank you, Laura. That was really, that was very thorough and addressed a whole lot of the challenges. One that I didn't, unless I missed it, the climate change aspect and of what's happening in New York, and the which I think has impacted Sunnyside and other areas that aren't necessarily in the flood zone, but the increased intensity of rain events and ultimately rising sea levels are going to mean, to me, even a higher level of danger that's not addressed by the code. And when you add those light wells that go down, you have to dig them out, then you have to drain those light wells, or then the windows are, those new holes, depressions are very likely to flood in these extreme rain events. And I don't know if that's something you want to comment on or had any way of evaluating.
But it's a very good point. I mean, I thought of it as we were doing the 3D drawing that, of course, rain would get in there also. It's an issue. I mean, usually you try to get the water away from the house. You try to we graded our whole house to try the whole front yard to get it away because we had issues with our little drain from our porch water coming in the basement, cellar. So, yeah, I don't think that when they designed this, we had that incident. So I don't think people really thought it was an issue, and it is now front and center. It's a front and center issue. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think it's another one of the reasons the program paused.
Well, perhaps rightly so. Thanks.
We have a question from Roz. Please confirm the requirement for means of egress 1 or 2. I thought I heard you say 1 means of egress in the beginning, but later 2.
It's 1 for a basement, 2 for a cellar.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We have another one. Let's say a row house cellar is at grade facing the street, but has 5-foot tall doorway facing the rear yard. Of course, a 5-foot door is not code, but is this space a cellar in the front or basement in the rear?
Ah, wait, try that one again.
It's in the chat if you want to read it yourself, but it's
okay. I'll read it.
Okay. Giving you a math problem.
Has a 5-foot tall doorway.
Okay, but is this basically Nicholas? Nicholas, you want to just turn on your camera and talk, or you want to stay anonymous?
Hi, Laura.
Hi, it's me. I can just talk to you. Are you saying that site slopes, so the front has a different height than the back?
Correct.
Yeah, that's a challenge. The building department says that the whether it's a basement or cellar is determined by the base plane, which is basically curb. So the front curb is what determines it.
Okay, no, that's what I suspected. Thanks for clearing that up. I understand. So this is officially a cellar.
Yes.
No matter what happens in the back. Got it. Thank you.
But you know, the building department is the building department, and code is up to interpretation. So if you really tried to push it, I'm sure people have tried to say, you know, in the back, it's able to be habitable because you can actually have the ground at the level that makes it habitable space, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it happens here a lot. It happens a lot in Astoria because the streets were built up. So there are a lot of houses in Astoria where the actual entrances are much lower than they were originally. So in the back, they're very low, and in the front, they're up high. And so the back is like, you know, you're at grade.
Yeah, I think I'm in Park Slope, and I think it's a similar thing. They laid sewers, and then they covered over the sewer with basement excavation and fill. Mm-hmm. So we have typically lower yards, and we're at baseline on the facade, the street access. So yeah, it's clear and yet still complicated. But thank you for that information.
Ross just commented again, I thought if the floor area is more than half as a basement, it's considered a basement.
What the floor area is considered a basement? I'm not aware of that. I mean, if that's something, to me that sounds more like something that happens in a plan exam than something that's actually written down somewhere. But I'm not aware of
it. You're probably right. I mean, I think I have used that argument once. That where you have a sloping site, right? And more than half of the the floor is a basement because it's above grade. I mean, not above grade, more than half above grade.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think I might have, I can't remember anymore. It's been a long time. I might have argued that that was a basement instead of a cellar.
Sounds like a decent argument.
Yeah, no, you can, no, I have a row house in Astoria where the back room, they allowed me to make it habitable. And it is basically, and it's still a cellar, but I had to count it in FAR. So there is a gray area when you do that. There is a gray area. But it's not counted as half of the, it's not counted half as a basement, but we had to add all of it in the floor area.
Okay.
And we couldn't have a 3-piece bathroom, like go figure.
Are there any other questions?
So I guess Roz and Christine, you know this stuff inside and out. So I'm just curious though, if the, and I don't know if Susan and Nicholas do, but I'm just wondering if it was made clear, if you thought it was clear, the steps to evaluate sellers.
I thought it was good. It was clear. And yeah, I don't really have as much experience as you have on cellars and basements. So I appreciate it. I appreciate your presentation. Thanhave you.
Yeah, well, I thought it was really helpful. You have more. I've dealt with it more in terms of multifamily dwellings, not single family house. You know, the 1- and 2-family houses. So, you know, and in a multifamily building, it's connected, the infrastructure of the house, the core of the building connects the lower unit to everything else, whereas that's different here.
True, right.
So thank you.
Okay.
Yes, and Susan Hopper also said very clear.
I see that. I have the chat open.
And from my perspective, I will say, seemed pretty clear as well. I knew only cursory things. So yes, it was interesting. And yeah, you
well, what do you, since we have like, you know, 5 more minutes or something, what do you think should happen? Does anyone have any opinion about whether we should encourage this or not?
If I were to, I think there's much more potential to converting garages, especially above grade garages. So when you showed the house that had the garage at the street level and then the house above. And there, you know, a 2-car garage is the size of a studio apartment.
Yep.
And it already has the frontage, you know, for windows and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that has a lot more potential to create more units.
Russell just made an interesting point. What if you already have a basement apartment, but you use the cellar for like a washer dryer, which is kind of mechanicals. Is that allowed?
What if you have a legal basement apartment? We want to add access to the cellar.
It's not livable space.
You can't add a bedroom in the, oh wait, are we talking about now, like current code, or in this program? We're talking about current code, right?
I believe it's current code. So the bedroom would be illegal, but what about the washer dryer?
You have a washer dryer in a cellar.
Okay. That's mechanical space, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can have a laundry room. Yeah, almost all of the houses that I encounter with restored homes, the washer dryer is down there. It's legal. And it is legal. All our houses have that. Yes.
Pursuing your question about what should we do, should we encourage this or what? I mean, in light of climate change, I would be really, really hesitant to make cellars legalized because we saw the loss of lives, you know?
Yeah.
Even with Egress, for example, we know that some of those fatalities were caused because they didn't act fast enough. And my understanding from reading it in the newspapers, my understanding is that the water came so fast and they could not open the door. I mean, the doors, you know, the water pressure was so much, I don't know which way from the inside, they couldn't open the doors, you know?
Yeah.
So they had a way to get out, but they couldn't open the doors because of the water pressure. So
and the windows are too small, and the windows are too high and too small.
Yeah, well, you know, I just think it's very risky to encourage people to live in cellars. As much as we need affordable housing, and as much as we need more housing, that may not be the way. I mean, basements, yes, but cellars, it's really risky, I would say. I mean, you know, with the reality of climate change, we're trying to raise everything that we build new now, and then here we are digging down, you know? It just doesn't seem right, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I actually, good night, everyone. My name is Farah, and I actually served as a homeowner, the homeowner voice in the pilot program that happened in East Brooklyn. So it's part of all of those meetings that happened and all of those interesting viewpoints. I think I don't come to this conversation with a lot of professional technical experience. I guess I come with a lot of social and civic experience in the sense that I'm a homeowner in East New York and I have a basement. And I am a family of one, right? But I can't even move legally into my own basement to rent out the apartment that I live in, because if I were to move into my own basement to create a unit for a larger family, it would be illegal and wrong. And so it has been this conundrum that I've been facing often, where it's like, I could live in the basement because it has all of the things that you're mentioning in terms of light, air, egress, all of the above. It's even attached to the garage that exits to a common driveway and all this other stuff. But I can't use that space and no one can use that space. And usually on the societal end of this conversation, what makes people convert those spaces is kind of really desperation. It may not always be greed motivated. So it's kind of like this weird place that we are in as a society where we don't have the tools that we need to support some of the people who are probably the most marginalized. So it's just, I don't know where we should land on it, but I think there needs to be a way to kind of examine some of the nuances in some of the cases and not just make it rote and like, I don't know, checklist like.
So is the issue with your basement that it just doesn't have a C of O that says you can occupy it, or is it? That's
one. And also I live in the area where it's kind of the Howard Beach, Lindenwood border, and based on like, and then the area that they call the hole. So there is, although my area is not like I don't know the technical terms, but isn't in that area where we constantly get flooding and all of that, but we're adjacent to it. There are insurance implications. And even though I served as part of the task force that kind of informed this process, I couldn't even do anything with my property because of insurance liabilities. You know, like where the city was basically like, no, we won't be able to do it because insurance companies are like, nah, you fall in the area of risk.
Wow. Huh. I wasn't aware of that aspect of it.
Is there also a zoning issue where you couldn't legally have two units in your house? Is that part of it?
No, it wasn't because the way that, if I remember correctly, the homes that, because we were part of the whole rezoning process. So I guess was it area median, I forget what the technical terms are, but you can actually you would be eligible, or the chances of you being able to create more livable space in your home was allowed within the zone. Okay. Because we were being upzoned. So my home is technically legally a 2-family with this basement level access that was and my home is only 15 years old. So it is in the diagram and all the things, it's drawn in, like you have this space, and it was identified as kind of like a den or a storage room, but no one can live on it or no one can live in it. So now it's just holding stuff. When I think another thing in terms of like to mitigate risk, if the owner is assuming the risk of inhabiting that space that is potentially liability causing, I think that may be an option. Like I would be able to sign, like if I was given a chance to sign a waiver saying like, you understand the risk of living on this level of your home, I would do it because it would free up a 3-bedroom apartment to a potential family.
So even though your basement doesn't often flood, they still consider it too much of a risk?
Yes, because my neighboring areas, the areas like the Hole and parts of Howard Beach, flood often. And they just imagine with climate change, we're just going to be like the next wave in.
Have you checked the FEMA flood maps? Yeah, and are you within?
I'm not in one of the areas that are defined as critical by FEMA, but by insurance. It's kind of like the color of law. Apparently there's a map where my area is considered in the red zone. And because of that, the city I wouldn't be able to participate in the retrofit or this pilot program that I helped to design.
They just shouldn't allow anyone to live in the Hole. None of that should be legal.
Yeah, I think there's actually some urban planners that were doing, because I was on a community land trust meeting last night, and there's been a lot of discussion about the Hole and creating infrastructure to make it more habitable, or like just not even more habitable, to improve the quality of life of individuals who live in the Hole. And the fact that we call it the Hole is problematic within and of itself. But that's another story for another day. But it's always just really super challenging to me. Like right now, that space could actually hold me and my stuff because I am a family of 1, but it is holding yarn because the city, like because of all of the red tape of the city, a person can't live in it.
I hear you. Do you know any of the, there were 8 that were completed in the pilot program?
I don't know about the projects because that whole task force took like 2 years of my life and all the so I kind of fell out of like all of the details after it rolled out. And the interesting thing is because my home is fairly new, is like one of those city projects. So I'm in a community of 46 homes that are exactly the same. And within the 46, like my 45 neighbors, many of them rent that space illegally, taking the risk. And it's not because they're like profiteering vultures. It's because like we're a working class community, and they take this risk, and there's any given time, someone can stop by and like now fine you. So it's just there's a disconnect, and oftentimes we're thinking of the abstract when we're trying to solve for this disconnect, and we need to like kind of step away from the abstract and probably move to a more people-centered approach.
Well, when I've heard this described before, I sometimes have come away thinking that the people speaking about it don't really practice on a small scale in Queens or Brooklyn, because they're not as familiar with that's not to say I know more, it's just that it's so complicated that it sounds great in theory, but you have that exception, there's so many other exceptions, there's so many. So it's very hard to just clearly say, you can do it, you can't do it. There's too many variables. So in the abstract, it might sound really exciting. This is free land, right? But I have found that also. And every case is slightly different.
Mm-hmm. And so that's where it's kind of like, it would be ideal if we could work on a solution to solve this issue, to create these additional units, but I don't know, employ a method that is not so rote. There has to be some kind of way that we're able to execute it where it's not clinical in its approach. Because of what you point, there's so many different variables, so many, like, it's crazy. Like, I know 46 homes that have, by my definition, if we were to install sprinklers in our homes, have completely habitable spaces, but they're not legally habitable spaces because of, and I think it's honestly probably because of money. Maybe when the developer was doing it, it would have been something that fell out, kind of cost more money to do, or whatever the case may be. And so they just kind of created these spaces that can't be defined as livable units, but they very much could be in practical terms. And they are being used as livable units.
Well, I didn't totally solve the puzzle, but I actually thought, looking at these 4 houses, I was hoping that it could not to solve the problem, but it just seems like there's there are specific constraints that if you can't have this, if you don't have this amount of linear feet, you're not gonna be able to do it. If you don't have this much height, you're not gonna be able to do it. And if that could be made clear, at least the template could be easier to explain to people than to keep it abstract. But I mean, it's hard because, like you said, everything has its own little unique issues. But I don't have the solution, but I delve deeper than I have in a long time. I tell you that.
And this is why we were saying this is such a convoluted, difficult topic, because yeah, like you hear people saying, oh, we want to make them legal. We want to make it, habitable. And it's like, that's great. And they're like, oh, people already live there, so we should just find ways to make it legal. And it's like, well, I don't really know if you're doing that, but okay. And then on the other hand, you have weird, complicated legislation that has what is presumably habitable space not being allowed as livable space. And so it's like, on the one hand, you do want it to be formulaic so that people can just know what the rules are and do them. But then on the other hand, you kind of want it to be individualized, so you can be like, no, I get why you think that this is going to flood, but here, this is not happening. And it's like, they can't review everything individually, but also they need to. It is a difficult thing when it's both personal and individual, and also on a large scale of 8 million people.
But that's what makes it New York.
Right?
That's what makes it New York.
We're always making things complicated.
Well, I mean, a homeowner, I can't legally, I'm not legally supposed to sleep in my cellar, which sounds strange. I mean, it sounds strange, right?
Like if the Department of Buildings stopped by and I was taking a nap in my basement, they probably would find me. Like I remember, because I even had a situation where there were fines and violations. I'm not going to get into that, but I had a dresser in the space, and they're like, "Oh, someone's living there." I was like, "No, this is extra furniture. This is storage." So it was kind of like, oh, they almost went, I had to open up the drawer to kind of show like there's not like clothes in there.
Wow.
Like, it was so ridiculous. But yeah, so it's crazy. Like the owner of the home can't sleep in their cellar or sleep in their basement because that's illegal. So I think there are some ways, maybe kind of like, because I would totally sign a waiver so I could sleep in my own basement of my own house.
Well, I'm glad you brought this perspective. Actually, it's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I'm serious because, I mean, I feel that way about my cellar. I'm not trying to rent it, and there are all these rules about how I can use it. So for me, there was so much irony with this program saying now you can have people rent them when we can't even use ours. It's strange to me. But I tell people you can sleep in any room. It's just not a bedroom. But you can't sleep in another apartment, I guess.
Yes. And the other level of this was
you can sleep in your kitchen.
Yes, you can sleep in your kitchen. Put a mattress in there. But I was trying to at this stage of I was actually trying to save my home, honestly. Saving
I hear you.
From foreclosure. Like so, and it's like I can't even do that.
And it seems like a waste of space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Michelle, it's the witching hour at 7 o'clock. Are we done here?
Well, I don't see any other questions. Lots of thank yous, lots of great presentation. So yes, I think we are good to end.
If anyone has any follow-up questions or issues, feel free to contact me. I'm here in Sunnyside in my storefront, so I'm happy to. I've done all this research. I'm happy to share whatever I know in terms of this knowledge. So thank you for giving me the opportunity, HTC.
Thank you. Although we did not solve the problem, this was very educational. Thank you. And again, this has been recorded, so it'll be up on our YouTube channel along with all of our other videos. Go watch them. And thank you, everyone. And hopefully I will see everyone again tomorrow night for our New York City Zoning Preservation School.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.